regulation, without the central banks, without the draconian government decrees, which of course, that's going to take some time to get to. But no, there's nothing to fix it.
Hi, and welcome to the X22 Report Spotlight. Today we have a returning guest, Andy Hoffman. Andy is the marketing director of Miles Franklin. You can see all his work on milesfranklin.com. He has his blogs, he has his audio blogs on there. All you have to do is visit the site. I'll put all the links at the bottom of this video. Andy, welcome back to the Spotlight.
Well, thanks for having me. Each time I come, there's more and more interesting topics to talk about.
There are tons of things happening, and I just wanted to start off in Greece right now because we're having the same battle since 2008. We have the IMF, we have the EU, and they're telling them they need more austerity. Greece is fighting back. Is this ever going to end? Is it ever going to get any better in Greece?
No, of course not. I mean, it's, you look at the numbers of what's happened since the first bailout, which was back in, bailout with quotes around it back in 2010. And, unequivocally, this is the single worst point in Greek history. And history goes back quite a ways, economically, financially, socially, as far as the social unrest. Politically, it's in chaos. And of course, the people that are trying to administer this austerity to them may not even be around much longer. I mean, there's the troika of the IMF and the ECB and the European Commission. I mean, they're fighting their own battles to stay around. They're massive internal battles over policies and immigration and monetary policy. And of course, all these elections, starting with the Dutch election last week, which could literally end their reign of terror before they even get to the point of a Greek bailout. But of course, Greece is going to exit from the European Union and default on, I think it has 450 billion euros of debt and another like 200 billion off balance sheet. Of course, they're going to default on it, just like all the other pigs and some of the less piggy pigs. Like, well, I used to call it the PFIGs because I lumped France in there. And I think you're going to see some of the first world nations defaulting on debt, either through probably actual defaults, because they may not be an ECB to hyperinflate it in the coming years.
So, I mean, you talk about the EU and all these different votes. I mean, we have the Netherlands, the Nexit, the Frexit, the Grexit, the Swexit. I mean, we have tons of them. I mean, a lot of them are coming up right now, starting in March, going throughout this year and into 2018. A lot of people saying that the EU is not even going to exist moving forward. Is that what you're seeing also? You don't think the EU will exist?
I don't think that there's going to be a troika to administer any kind of bailouts, even if they wanted to, because of the internal infighting and potentially the end of the European Union. And look, the European Union, everyone wants to believe, it can't possibly happen. It's this big entity. The European currency's only been around for 18 years, and it's basically, just about at a 15-year low. In fact, we might hit that 15-year low today, the way things are looking. So we're talking about, people are unhappy. That's why the Brexit occurred. I mean, that's why Trump was elected. People are unhappy everywhere, but particularly in Europe because of the dysfunction of the European Union and, of course, the immigration crisis caused by the crash of oil and all the wars in the Middle East that have all the people, emigrating out of the Middle East into Europe, which is right there. So I think it's inevitable. I mean, look, we've had so far, we had the Catalonian vote. And by the way, the Catalonian final secession vote right now, I think is scheduled for September. I mean, I don't know why no one talks about this. That's a quarter of all of Spain and its wealthiest, highest tax-paying region. And September is only a few months from now. And Spain has one of the worst financial situations in all of Europe. But yes, before that, we have the Dutch election next week. It's pretty obvious Geert Wilders, who's the anti-Euro, anti-EU candidate, is going to win. They say he needs to form a coalition government, so he may not be able to call for a Netherlands exit, vote. That remains to be seen. I have a feeling that if he wins, he's going to have a lot more power than people think. But more importantly, that's nothing. The big one is France. We're not even going to talk about Italy because they haven't announced the snap elections yet. But now that the Democratic Party there just collapsed last week with Renzi resigning, they're going to have to call them soon. And of course, the German elections, which won't be as draconian as what's going to happen in some of the other places, but will definitely have a big impact because Angela Merkel and her ruling Christian Democrats are going to get swept out as well. But the big one is, of course, France. That's a 2-round election. The first one is in April, and then there's a second round in May. It's pretty obvious that Marine Le Pen will be through the first round, and the only question is, can she fight through the propaganda that's out there, just like the anti-Brexit and the anti-Trump propaganda to win the second round? And I think she's going to shock everyone. I mean, look, they gave Trump the day of the election 20% odds, and the Brexit 30% odds the day of the vote, and they're above 30% for her right now, which shows you they're having trouble holding down her chances. I think the popular support and the level of financial and social dysfunction in France is gonna lead her to a dramatic victory, and she will call for a Frexit and getting out of the euro entirely. And these are the kind of things that can quickly spiral out of control for the entire continent.
So when these countries actually leave, let's talk about what happens afterwards. They're going to go back to their own currencies?
I don't think they've thought it out. Well, yeah, I mean, she has a plan. The plan is to have some new franc, and I'm sure she's got all kinds of bells and whistles to try to hide the fact that it's going to be worth dramatically less than the euro itself, and is going to, be unable to pay back its debts. But yeah, that's the only option. Go back to national currencies. And again, it's the whole problem with the euro is that it enabled countries with lesser financial prospects to have more highly valued currencies. And when they go back to their original currencies, they're going to have a lot less purchasing power. And that includes the French franc. I mean, France is a financial basket case. And France, by the way, is, one of the biggest creditors of all these pigs nations that are going to default. And of course, as the euro continent falls apart, starting with the Brexit, which they're going to actually formally do later this year, trade's going to fall off in a big way, and they're going to have even further problems in paying back their debts. But again, once that vote occurs, all else is going to fall in line, because there's going to be chaos that ensues if she wins. And again, just like the Brexit, just like the Trump, they are maintaining their best propagandists bent to pretend she can't win. I mean, think about it. Her main competition going into this was this guy Francois Fillon, who was at one point the prime minister himself. I mean, it's crazy. I never even heard of the guy, but now he's involved in this huge embezzlement scandal where he was stealing EU funds to give jobs to his wife and kids and pay them money. So he's out. He's going to lose. So of course they have to come up quick with a new candidate to say that is going to beat Marine Le Pen. And it's incredible. They came up. Remember, the reason that they're having this crazy election is because Francois Hollande, who's a one-term president, who's not even running for re-election because he has the lowest ever approval ratings in the history of modern France. His finance minister, this guy Macron, is all of a sudden now the new leading candidate. He's 39 years old, if you could believe it. He's been in office for like 3 years, ran France into the ground under Francois Hollande. And by the way, his background is total silver spoon, rich kid, investment banker, all that kind of stuff. And they're trying to convince these angry people in France that this guy is somehow going to beat Marine Le Pen, which is not going to happen.
So do you think investors will then rush into gold or silver when countries start to leave the EU?
Yes. I mean, they're going to be rushing out of euros is what they're going to be doing. It's going to.
How about the dollar?
Yeah, well, I said all along, crisis in the world causes the dollar to go up because it's the most liquid currency. It has nothing to do with dollars, with U.S. economic strength or military strength. It's the reserve currency, and therefore it's the most liquid. And that's why, while all these people, even in my sector for years, have been saying, well, gold's going to go up because the dollar is going to go down. No, the dollar's purchasing power will go down against gold when it's not manipulated as much, but not against other fiat currencies because it's the strongest fiat currency. It's the reserve currency. And so it keeps going up and up. And the more crisis you have, the more the dollar will go up, as it always does during crisis, which is it's the two-edged sword, because what it does is it crushes America's competitiveness even more. And more importantly, it crushes the currencies of the world, which are already, for the most part, at all-time lows. I mean, look what's going on today. Like I said about the euro, it makes their inflation and their inability to pay back their monstrous debts that much starker. So, it's a vicious loop that will only feed on itself. And of course, part of that money is going to go into gold and silver. I mean, it always does. It always has throughout history and always will. And the only thing between the all-time highs we had years ago and where we are now is that manipulation. And of course, in other currencies, prices are a lot closer to the all-time highs. I mean, in euros, it's only about 15% from the all-time high compared to 35% over here because of the manipulation. So I think you're going to see a dramatic change as the historic bubbles in financial assets, historic valuations like nothing ever seen before, 1929, 2000, 2008, you name it, are going to pop. Certainly in real terms, maybe not in nominal terms if they actually go the route of hyperinflation. But a lot of that money is going to flee this risk trade, this ridiculous Trumpflation meme that's never going to come true. It can't mathematically come true, and it's going to go into safe haven assets.
You talk about precious metals popping. We see Bitcoin right now is making strong moves up. And recently we've seen silver. Well, that was completely slammed down by like 2 billion of notional silver into the future pits. And there was also it was like 23,000 silver future contracts that were dumped that brought silver down, and not so much as for gold, but we see that they're still suppressing gold and silver. I mean, what are they so worried about?
Well, they're worried about exactly what I'm talking about here. And look, I wrote the other day an article called the 200-week moving average war, which is exactly what's going on against gold and silver. They were, I'm talking about not 200 200 weeks. That's a huge technical level. And for gold, it's about 1260. And for silver, it's about 1860 per ounce. And that's, exactly where where they were trading the night of the election. Hence the need to go into this massive smash down mode. Remember, they were above those averages from 2003 all the way up until April 2013, when you had that massive smash in April, the day after Obama had his unprecedented closed door meeting with all the too big to fail bank CEOs. And for 4 years, they've pushed prices down, and they've been able to push ahead this hyperinflationary meme for 4 more years. But here we are with gold and silver right back up at those levels, and they literally kissed those levels last Tuesday. Gold was actually at 1264, which is exactly what that number is, and silver was like at 1855. And then, sure enough, as you said, it was $2.7 billion worth of notional silver hit the COMEX right around the open, and of course, got the ball rolling, the record commercial shorts, meaning government shorts. And, here we are in another sell cycle. And it was coincident with the Fed coming out with, the most inane, policy change ever. Just, we were at post-election interest rate lows, and all the data was horrible. And then all of a sudden on Tuesday, they start coming out saying, we're going to raise rates, we're going to raise rates, we're going to raise rates. And this is at the same time as their own GDP model for the first quarter has been pushed down to 1.3%, and all the hard data is just rolling over everywhere. I mean, Germany had -7% industrial production in January. I mean, we're talking about it's incredible how much effort has gone in to quelling gold and silver before they break through those levels. And here we are a week later, and now interest rates are surging, which is going to kill the economy, and the dollar is surging, which is going to kill the economy. But they have pushed gold and silver away temporarily from those levels, and just like they did after the election, they will rebound and come right back again and challenge them until eventually they break free. And as for Bitcoin, people who listen to me know I just wrote another article this weekend called, Bitcoin and gold, same as it ever was in a rapidly changing world. I mean, people are looking for safe haven assets, and governments, which are historically terrified about gold and silver because of the threat they pose, now have to contend with Bitcoin as well, because it's another alternative form of wealth preservation that they don't know anything about. So, like you see this morning, the Chinese are still not allowing withdrawals of Bitcoin from their exchanges under the guise of anti-money laundering. It's the same kind of thing. They are terrified of the threats to anything that's that threatens their paper currencies that are being destroyed. And the catch-22 is they have to keep destroying those currencies, or else the gig ends immediately. So yeah, you're going to see more and more moving of assets out of overvalued markets and manipulated markets and into safe havens. And that's inexorable and unstoppable.
Yeah, you mentioned inflation, and you mentioned Germany, Spain, the U.S., and we see inflation is moving up. Do you think the Fed is going to be able to control inflation, or do you think inflation is just going to run away and they're going to completely lose control over it?
Well, as long as they print money at the rate they're doing it, there's going to be higher inflation. But of course, that inflation right now, because the velocity of money remains really low, because people have been, hoodwinked into believing the manipulations of the markets. They haven't had that fear yet because they see the Dow at an all-time high. But the fact is, it certainly crept into the cost of living in a big way. Certainly over here, our cost of living is exploding. And that's nothing compared to all the other currencies around the world who are watching. If you're in Europe, the euro is down from 1.6 to 1.05. I mean, and that's the second biggest currency in the world. So we're talking about, major increases in inflation around the world, even more so than here. And, all the money printing is slowly causing it to increase here. And of course, it's rapidly hyperinflating our bubble markets. But once you have any kind of crisis, and what's amazing was with all the terrible things going on politically, economically, socially, monetarily, because this hyper crazy manipulation of markets, we haven't really had a crisis in like a year's time. We haven't even had a 1% drop in the S&P 500 in, 6 months, or a 10% drop in more than a year. So people still have enough confidence that they're not racing out of dollars and into safe haven assets. Certainly not at the clip that they're going to be. But I mean, of course, we're going to have a crisis one of these days, whether it's because of France or because the Federal Reserve are raising rates and causing, what's already, all these interest rate sensitive businesses are already falling apart, and they'll only get worse if they keep doing this. So, some catalyst is going to cause even the greatest manipulation ever to be overcome. And when it does, you're going to see a crisis of confidence in the currencies, especially because at some point, the Fed itself is going to have to reverse course and do what all the other central banks in the world are doing, which is to go back on the hyper-monetary inflation trail.
It's funny you mentioned the Dow, the S&P 500 not having a correction. We hear from Bank of America, Citibank, JP Morgan, and many others, many other individuals out there saying that the second half of this year, things are going to rapidly fall apart. Actually, Bank of America, Citi, and JP, they're telling people to sell off right now. Is that your take on it too, that we haven't had any type of crisis or anything come up, that it's coming?
We haven't had a crisis, and of course there's going to be one coming. I mean, there's always crises. But the thing is, that's so crazy is there are crises. I mean, major political and economic crises everywhere, and currencies have been crashing serially. And now, the Trump administration itself is at war with America and with the liberals. There's so much actual crisis going on. But because of the incredible amount of manipulation of all financial markets, which, look, I put a chart today in my article showing how the Dow was tracking economic data perfectly, at least the rigged economic data, until the day of the election, when all of a sudden they completely broke apart, because that was when the powers that be were, they were taken by surprise by the election. They said, we got to go full out. So it's at the point where they've created bubbles with valuations higher than any time in U.S. history. At a time of the worst economic situation in U.S. history. So, yes, of course, we're going to have a crisis, and that crisis may not even start in the United States. I mean, believe me, Marine Le Pen wins. I said when Trump wins, it'll be Brexit times 10. She wins, it'll be Brexit times 100.
So last time you were on, Trump was just inaugurated. And, after that, he was promising, jobs from many, many different companies. The latest one is from Exxon, promising 45,000 jobs. Do you think this is still possible to create all these jobs, bring manufacturing back under the circumstances right now?
Well, they were all lying. I mean, they're not, all these companies for publicity. They just say, yeah, we're going to do stuff, and they're not going to. First of all, like, automakers, they're going to build plants in America that are unprofitable just to appease Donald Trump. Of course, these things aren't going to happen. I'm not sure where you heard that about Exxon. Exxon is one of the biggest basket cases in the entire financial community. I mean, they're basically not barely profitable, if that at all. Certainly, when they're massively cash flow negative right now, so to the point that they've had to massively increase their debt just to pay their dividends, and their capex is collapsing. And now that the oil price is, look, I mean, I told you, I've been an oil analyst. That's what I did my prior life. And I've been railing against this fake lie of a OPEC production cut forever. And sure enough, with each passing day, there's more and more evidence that this historic and irreversible oil glut is getting worse. And so, at $50 a barrel, which is we're almost down there again now. That's the oil PPTs line in the sand. You're talking about dramatic cutbacks still for Exxon. And when we go below 50 again, I mean, we're going to talk about massive layoffs and capex cuts and all those kind of things. So I'm not sure why Exxon of all companies would be. I think they're going to be having mass layoffs over the coming years. And, again, a lot of these other companies that say they're going to do stuff, they're going to do, they meet Trump for half an hour and say, yeah, we're going to make American jobs. So they think it'll make their stock go up and maybe they'll get some tax favors. But that, saying you're going to do something, especially something that's not economically viable for your own interests, and actually doing it are two different things.
So what do you think his strategy is? Just to keep going to companies and say, hey, listen, you're going to bring jobs back? Yes, we are. I mean, eventually people are going to start, scratching their heads saying, okay, there are no jobs coming back. I mean, we made all these promises and here we are months later, there's nothing. So what's his strategy? What's the end game here?
Well, his strategy was to become president. And he did it like just as Obama and every other candidate becomes president. They say, this is what's wrong with the other administration so vote for me. And one of them is there's no jobs. So I'm going to get jobs. And, and again, you think about those job announcements. They all came like right in the first week of the presidency or right before the inauguration because he was just doing more political campaigning, like to get everyone all excited and let me meet people and saying. But the fact is, these things are not politically or economically feasible for these companies to add jobs. So they're not going to. Just like, again, he made a bunch of promises. And I, who am completely apolitical, but I spend a great deal of my, I write every day of my efforts saying we cannot let Hillary Clinton win, or should I say, Trump, you have to vote for Trump. But I said the day after I did an audio blog, it was like the day after the election called Turning on Trump. I said, okay, he's in. Thank God Hillary is not. But here's the reasons why not a thing that he promised is possible, starting with the repeal of Obamacare. And if, I was talking this morning about, the details of this horrifying Trump care proposal. It is as bad or worse than Obamacare. There's not a shred of difference. And then, of course, he's got to get, he wants fiscal stimulus. And by the way, that fiscal stimulus pales in comparison to what China did. And look where China is today. The premier at their National Congress this weekend said this is going to be the worst year of growth pretty much in modern Chinese history. And their debt is exploding. And that's the same thing here. He can't get any fiscal plans of any kind. And oh, yeah. Next week, less than a week, or 1 week, is the debt ceiling hits. So he said that I can't do any infrastructure or tax reform plans until I get a clarity on the healthcare issue. But after this proposal on healthcare, it's clear that issue is never going to be clarified. And of course, with the debt ceiling, how are you going to get any infrastructure or tax reform proposals? The point is, all these things were simply campaign promises. Obama promises hope and change. He promises his version of hope and change. And look where we are. There's no hope and change 8 years later. And the things that he wants, again, it's nothing against him personally. You could put anyone in the office. It doesn't matter. All those things were dead on arrival the second that he announced them. But people are just so angry at what's going on that they elected a great disruptor. And the point is, he's already under attack from America's attacking him, let alone, all the trade and economic and diplomatic wars that are being flared up everywhere. And I assure you, if the dollar goes up any further, it's going to get a lot crazier, let alone if interest rates go with it, because the Fed is insane enough to raise them. Look, right now the interest rates are surging. This is going to have catastrophic near-term impact on a nation that had 1.5% GDP growth in the fourth quarter and now is in danger of being below 1% in the first quarter. So, his strategy was to get elected president. And I'm sure his intentions were good, but he's in office for two months, and it's already clear, probably more including to him, that there's absolutely nothing he could do to stop this runaway train. And when the debt ceiling debacle starts next week, and when the elections start rolling in Europe, and God forbid if interest rates and the dollar keep rising, which will, remember, corporate earnings in this country have been down 6 quarters in a row. What will surging interest rates and the dollar do there? And again, we have bubble-like valuations, the stock market on top of it. So, his tweets, he's going to be a lot more conservative with his tweets soon about how great he is, because he's about to run into a brick wall of reality.
So, Andy, what does the U.S. have to do? What does the government have to do to set things right where we can have growth, where the U.S. can become another manufacturing superpower. Is it possible?
No, it's not. I mean, that's the whole point of this.
I mean, without Trump, I mean, what do you think has to be done?
And, I say this, I've been saying this for a long time. The thing that makes me the craziest, it's not you, but when people in general, I mean, look, people are trying to be optimistic and they're trying to get, listeners in the mainstream. But just to say, well, things are bad, so if we just do this, it'll fix it. I mean, there are things that are right choices versus wrong choices, but the big issue is the debt has to default. It's unpayable. There are structural problems in the economy that will never be fixed, such as demographics and the lack of competitiveness, with 6 billion other people around the world, let alone the ridiculous policies, monetary and fiscal, that are going on. And now we're going to initiate trade wars. That's really going to help. So no, there's nothing to do. The system needs to die and then needs to restart without the manipulation, without the central banks, without the draconian government decrees, which of course, that's going to take some time to get to. But no, there's nothing to fix it. He can make choices that are better than others, like don't institute trade tariffs. Or the Fed could just butt out and stop messing around with interest rates. I mean, these are correct choices versus the alternative, but they're really Hobson's choices, because if you don't do it, if you do it, you're damned. And if you don't do it, you're damned as well. So I think, to me, it's always been, even going back to 2008 when I wanted Ron Paul to win, I said, well, the system is screwed. I just want a good diplomat in there, someone who can be a good steward as we get through this canyon of financial and economic hell with a minimum of disruption. And here we had the choices of the great disruptor Trump and Hillary Clinton, who wanted World War III with Russia. So I don't think I don't think there's really anything you could do except for protect yourself and hope for the best, because it's certainly not going to come from the tops of government, either here or overseas. Anything that's going to mitigate this historically dangerous financial situation.
So basically what you're saying is we should get rid of the central bank. We need to default on the debt, and we need to reset pretty much everything in this country, which I agree with you. I completely agree with you. And it doesn't seem like Trump is actually going to do this. I mean, there's no talk about him getting rid of the Fed, defaulting on the debt as of yet.
Well, not yet. I mean, he's like a politician. He'll go to the very end and say, I'm going to make things better. But, again, for a so-called conservative, he hasn't really said or done anything different than what Hillary Clinton would do, other than, the modus operandi. I mean, he doesn't want to have war with Russia. That's one difference. But when you look at, for instance, Obamacare or Trump Care, it's the exact same thing. His spending plans, what, you think Hillary would have done anything different? You think she wouldn't propose a big fiscal spending plan? I mean, yeah, she may have a different tax plan, but ultimately, like you look at this Trump Care thing, you take away taxes, but then you add other things. So it's just calling it socialism under a different name. So look, he's just trying to, hold things together, just like any political candidate would do. And don't forget, on a personal level, I've said this from the beginning, there's very few people in this country who are more heavily leveraged to low interest rates and the continuation of financial market bubbles than him. Because trust me, if interest rates surge ahead right now, the Trump empire itself is going to be in danger. So I think and if you look at all the people that he's hired in his cabinet, all these billionaires and Goldman Sachs people that have the same interests as he does personally, considering that he said he was going to drain the swamp, and you realize he's just a man. He's a better man than Hillary Clinton is, but he's just a man, and there's only so much. And there's nothing that any person could do. The math says that the system is going down, and you look at the evidence in front of you, and it is.
I just wanted to get into the Bundesbank, where they've repatriated their gold, and the time frame was 7 years, but they accelerated the time and they brought in all their gold. Is there a reason that you know of why they decided to accelerate getting all their gold back?
Well, the first thing I'd say is I don't believe a word they say. These are chronic liars. These are the worst people in the world. And, Wolfgang Schäuble, the finance minister of Germany, is probably the biggest creep of all of them. He's the guy who's always pretending he's Mr. Conservative as he's giving out all the bailouts and allowing all the money printing at the ECB. And, look, Germany's the home of Volkswagen. I mean, Volkswagen is symbolic of how much you should believe from the powers that be about their true intentions. So have I ever seen the German gold? that they talk about all this time? Has anyone ever seen this German gold? So why should I believe that they either have it or the Fed has it or that's been transported? But if you take it at face value, the fact that it took 3 years to get gold that should have been in their vaults in a month if it was actually available tells you all you need to know. And what we do know is that the gold they did receive, a lot of it is not the same gold that they gave to the Fed. It has different serial numbers, meaning that the Fed had encumbered it and then probably scrambled to get it. My most likely scenario is the Germans see what's going on in Europe and they say, we got to get our gold quick. And they said to the Fed, give us our gold. None of this 3 or 4 year. We want it now. And so they got different gold that the Fed went out and somehow sourced somewhere else. So, but that's just a guess. I don't know. But the point is, do I believe a word that the Bundesbank says about anything, or the Federal Reserve, or the government? Nothing. I don't believe anyone anymore. I believe the people that I trust in the alternative media, and the people that have a proven track record of telling the truth. And the German government has about the worst track record of telling the truth of any entity in history.
Andy, thank you very much for being on the X22 Report Spotlight. I really appreciate it. Once again, how can people see your work?
Right. Miles Franklin, Precious Metals, in our 28th year in business. I write for free every day at the Miles Franklin blog, milesfranklin.com. And you can email me at ahoffman@milesfranklin.com.